All right, let's head to Queensland now. 300 days on from the release of the Caldrake report, shocking insights in that report into the culture of the Queensland government, issues with integrity, big issues with transparency, a whole lot of reforms proposed by Peta Credlin, well, they're yet to be introduced by the Premier. This was about undue influence, you remember, from lobbyists, issues with the public service, 14 recommendations made to clean up the government. As I said, nothing's happening. Well, why? Queensland Opposition Leader David Crisafulli joins me now to update us. Well, she promised to clean up the state. 300 days on is almost a year. Why hasn't the Premier kept her word, David?
Because their heart was never really in it, Peter, and they denied there was an issue with integrity for many, many months. Eventually they were dragged to this position and they did this report, and they were hoping that would be the circuit breaker, that it would all disappear. Well, it hasn't, and integrity matters to me and it matters to Queenslanders. And to see a landmark report that really belled the cat on just how dire the integrity crisis is in this government, a culture of fear, entrenched fear in the public service, of ministers carrying on without any form of immunity at all, of staffers walking through the bureaucracy, of lobbyists running unchecked. All that came through on this report, and this report was titled "Let the Sun Shine In." Well, after a decade in office, the government's more interested in seeing the sun rise on a fourth term in office than letting the sunlight in and fixing the integrity woes of this government.
I picked up the polls this week in Queensland, certainly heading your way for the LNP. Is this sort of issue, this integrity stench, added with the crime crisis, big problems with housing, is that why the Premier has slumped so badly, the Labor Party has slumped so badly?
Peter, I've never been a political commentator, and the numbers that drive me aren't polling numbers. The numbers that drive me are rising crime, rising costs that people are dealing with, rising ambulance ramping figures. They're the numbers that drive me. I can tell you, though, front and centre, that Queenslanders, they're hurting at the moment. People in small and family business and their staff are really worried about rising electricity costs, rising inputs, and the correlation isn't there with rising consumers. So they're deeply troubled, and you heard about inflation. I heard you were talking about that just a moment ago. That's a real issue for people. People are deeply worried about service delivery. We don't have as many police in Queensland as we did 2 years ago, despite the population growth. The laws aren't there to back them up, so people are worried about youth crime. They're worried about their kids being able to afford a home. These are the things that they're worried about. And the overlay to all of it is a government that is no longer focused on that. Everything is about how can we suppress little bits and pieces of information? How can we just try to control all the media? There's no honesty, there's no openness, and above all, there's no integrity. And people can see that. And we're fighting every day to shine a light on that, because when governments give up on governing with integrity, they give up on governing for you. And the priorities that mean something to you no longer mean anything to the government. And we're determined to change that, Peter.
I just remind people, of course, there's only one House of Parliament in Queensland. The Premier, or the Labor Party, has the numbers in the lower house, so there's very little scrutiny. There is no upper house. Just quickly, look, my sister's a midwife. She often works in remote parts of Australia, including up your way in Queensland. Stories abound of women having to travel hundreds of kilometres to give birth. It's got to a crisis stage, hasn't it?
Peter, I've sat down with a young mum whose daughter has the word Bruce Highway on her birth certificate. Just imagine that. A young mum whose child has the name of a highway beside their name on their birth certificate. That's where it's got to. And we're talking about places like Gladstone, a city of 60,000 people, where a young mum can't choose to have a baby where, when and how she wants. We've now had 38 maternity services closed since the late 90s in Queensland. 38 have closed. The only reprieve to that was there were 4 that were open in the brief period of an LNP government. We've got to get fair income about this. If we want people to live in regional areas, you've got to provide them a world-class health service. And part of that involves 100%. Being able to have a baby. And I just don't side with the fact that places that we were able to have kids at 40, 50 years ago, with the advancement of modern medicine, we should be able to allow that choice for young mums in a modern Queensland.
Keep fighting for it, David Crisafulli. I know it's huge on social media because this stuff really matters. Thank you for your time.